The principal called her name over the intercom on a Tuesday morning in October, and my mother-in-law spent the rest of that week telling everyone at her book club that my daughter had gotten into trouble at school. That is the kind of woman Diane Ferreira is. She hears one piece of information and fills in everything else herself, always with the worst possible interpretation, always aimed at the people she has decided do not measure up. My daughter's name is Cleo. She was 8 years old that fall, and she was, as Diane had been announcing to our extended family for the better part of 3 years, quiet. Too quiet, according to Diane, suspiciously quiet. The kind of quiet that Diane had decided, without any credentials to back it up, meant that something was either wrong with the child or wrong with how I was raising her. I want to be very clear about something before I go any further. Cleo is my biological daughter. She is the child of me and my husband, Tamaz Ferreira. Diane is Tamaz's mother, which makes her Cleo's paternal grandmother. She is connected to my daughter by marriage only, no blood tie to me, though she has spent 8 years acting as though she owns us both. Let me tell you how we got here. Tamaz and I met when we were both 26, at a conference in Atlanta where we were both presenting papers in adjacent fields. He was in structural engineering. I was finishing my graduate work in educational psychology. We got married 3 years later, in a small ceremony that Diane attended in a dress the color of a wedding gown, which I mention not because it still bothers me, it does not, but because it tells you everything you need to know about her relationship to subtlety. Cleo was born the following year, when I was 30, and I went back to my work as a learning specialist 4 months later. Diane had opinions about that. Diane had opinions about everything, delivered in the particular tone of a woman who had never once been told that her opinions were not requested. She was not loud about it, and that was the thing that took me years to fully understand. She was not a screamer. She did not throw things or call names in the way that would have been easy to point to and say, "There, that is the problem, that is the thing that is wrong." She was a whittler. She worked slowly and consistently, finding the softest parts and pressing there, pressing and pressing, her voice always pleasant, her smile always present, her meaning always absolutely clear. The first time she said something about Cleo being quiet, Cleo was 3 years old and sitting on the floor of Diane's living room building a block tower with absolute focused concentration while the adults talked around her. She doesn't say much, does she? Diane observed, to no one in particular, to everyone in the room. Tamaz said she was focused. His father, Ronaldo, nodded behind his newspaper without looking up. That was his move, the slight nod that meant he had heard but had elected not to participate. Tamaz's sister, Leela, was there too, sitting next to Diane on the couch, and she did what she always did, which was wait to see which way the current was moving before she contributed anything to the conversation. Leela was not a cruel person. She was a careful one, which in that family produced nearly the same results. I said that Cleo was building something. Diane smiled at me. Of course she is. It was the of course that told me everything. The implication being that I would naturally defend my daughter, that my defense was predictable and therefore dismissible, and that Diane's original observation stood uncontested. I did not argue. I watched Cleo place one more block on the tower, perfectly centered, and I made a mental note. The second time, Cleo was 5, at a family birthday party for Ronaldo. Diane's sister Ophelia was there, and Diane's oldest friend Bernadette Lau, who had known Diane since they were teenagers and mirrored her in every opinion so closely that I sometimes suspected one of them was a backup copy of the other. Cleo had been reading in the corner of the room, actually reading chapter books at 5, which I mention only because it becomes relevant, and Ophelia had leaned toward Diane and said, just loud enough for me to hear from across the room, "Is she always like this?" "She is what she is," Diane said. Her voice carried the specific warmth of someone delivering a verdict they have already made peace with. Some children need more encouragement. Nora does her best. I was standing 6 feet away. She knew I could hear her. That was not an accident. I went home that evening and called my colleague at the university, Dr. Sasha Obi, who ran the Gifted Learning Assessment program. Not to make a point, because I had been watching Cleo for months and I wanted to know what I was looking at. We scheduled an appointment for the following week. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon in February of that year. I reviewed the documents with Dr. Obi, asked my questions, thanked her, drove home, and sat in the driveway for about 4 minutes thinking about the particular feeling of already knowing something before someone finally puts the official words to it. Cleo's scores placed her in the 99th percentile in verbal reasoning and abstract problem solving. Dr. Obi's notes said that her quietness in group settings was not a deficit. It was selection. She was listening, processing, filing. When she spoke, she had already finished the entire conversation in her head. I did not tell Diane. I did not tell anyone in the Ferreira family. I told Tamaz, who held the report for a long time without saying anything, and then looked at me with an expression I cannot fully describe, except to say it was equal parts pride and something that looked like relief, as though he had been quietly carrying a question he had not known how to ask. I enrolled Cleo in a specialized gifted program at the Ashwood Academy across town, starting the following fall. The tuition was significant, $48,000 annually, but I had been building a college fund for her since she was 4 months old, and I had also, in the years since Cleo was born, been quietly growing a consulting practice on the side of my university position, working with school districts on assessment design and learning support frameworks. By the time Cleo was 5, that practice was generating more income than my salary. I did not tell Diane that either. Here is the thing about being underestimated by someone who has decided you are small. You have 2 options. You can spend your energy correcting the impression, which is exhausting and rarely works because people who have decided you are small are not consulting evidence when they maintain that position. Or you can let them keep the impression and use the distance it creates. I had chosen the second option 3 years ago. I was not passive. I was not quietly suffering. I was building, and the building required space, and the space required Diane to continue believing she understood exactly who I was. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. Not like defeat, like a clock. Tamaz knew the outlines of what I was doing. He knew about the consulting practice, knew about Cleo's enrollment at Ashwood, knew that I had met twice with an attorney named Gloria Huang, who specialized in educational rights and, separately, estate planning. That second part had started because Tamaz's parents had a property portfolio that included a rental home they had been vaguely promising to put into a trust for their grandchildren, and the word vaguely had been doing significant work in that sentence for about 2 years. Gloria had advised me to begin thinking about what protections we could build independently of whatever Diane and Ronaldo decided to do with their assets, and I had taken that advice seriously. Tamaz was not in the dark. He was also, if I am being honest about this, not fully in the light. He knew the facts, but he did not entirely understand what I understood about his mother, which was that she was not going to stop. The whittling was not going to stop. And Cleo was getting old enough to hear it. That was the thing that had changed. When Cleo was 3 and not speaking, she was not processing what Diane said about her. When Cleo was 5, she was beginning to. And now Cleo was 8, and she was in 3rd grade at Ashwood, and she was being given awards by her principal, and she was also, I had noticed in recent months, getting quieter around her grandmother than she was anywhere else. Not her natural quiet, a different kind, a smaller kind. The kind that comes from a child who has started to understand that someone in the room has already decided something about her. That understanding, when I let myself sit with it, produced something in my chest that was not patience. It was not strategic silence. It was the very specific temperature of a decision that has been made. Let me tell you about the weeks before the dinner. Tamaz's parents had an annual October gathering. They called it a family dinner, but it was closer to a formal occasion. The kind with a set table and a menu. Diane spent 2 weeks planning and specific seating that reflected her internal hierarchy in ways she would have denied if asked. We had attended every year since Tamaz and I got married. I had never once been seated at Diane's end of the table. The year Cleo was 8, the invitation came in early October, and I accepted it the same day I received something else in the mail. A letter from Ashwood Academy informing me that Cleo had been selected to receive the Founders Excellence Award, presented annually to 1 student per grade level who demonstrated exceptional academic achievement and intellectual leadership. The letter was signed by Principal Damon Ape. It included a formal ceremony date of November 2nd. I put the letter in the top drawer of my desk. I did not tell anyone. 2 days later, I called Gloria Huang's office and made an appointment. I had been meaning to revisit the conversation about the trust documents, specifically a clause that Ronaldo had mentioned in passing last Christmas, that the rental property in Decatur, which was valued at approximately $420,000, would be left to the grandchildren through some arrangement he had not fully described. I had asked Gloria about this informally once before, and she had told me that some arrangement was not language that held up in court, and that if Tamaz and I wanted to ensure any inheritance reached Cleo directly, we needed independent documentation of our own. I sat across from Gloria on an afternoon in mid-October, in her office on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and we went through what she had drafted. A standalone educational trust for Cleo, funded through my consulting practice earnings, with a named trustee, my sister, Renata Scott, who had a background in financial management and who Cleo adored. The trust was structured to cover educational costs through college and graduate school if applicable, with a secondary provision for professional development if Cleo chose a path that required it. The balance at that point was $65,000 and growing. This operates entirely independently of the Ferreira family assets, Gloria said, setting her pen down on the notepad where she had been writing. Whatever they decide to do with their property, Cleo is already covered. That's what I needed to hear. Gloria looked at me for a moment with the particular expression of an attorney who has seen enough family situations to know when someone is building a wall rather than a bridge. Is there something specific that's prompting the timeline on this? There's a family dinner in 2 weeks. She did not ask me to elaborate. She slid the folder across the desk and told me when to come back to sign. Tamaz and I attended a school fundraiser the following week at Ashwood, one of those auction events in a hotel ballroom where the bid sheets get increasingly frantic after the second glass of wine. I had put Cleo with my sister for the evening. Tamaz's sister Leela was also at the event. Her nephew was in Cleo's class, and at one point, while Tamaz was bidding on a weekend stay at a lake house, Leela appeared beside me at the appetizer table. "Mom mentioned you've been looking at office space downtown," Leela said, not accusatorially, just conversationally, though the information landed in a way that told me Diane had been paying more attention than she usually let on. "I have a few colleagues downtown," I said. "I've gone to visit them a couple of times. She thought maybe you were opening something new." Leela picked up a shrimp from the platter. She asked Dad if he knew anything about it, and he said he didn't. "Ronaldo doesn't know much about my work," I said pleasantly. "I'm not sure why he would." Leela looked at me sideways. There was something behind the look, not quite warning, not quite apology. Leela was always in this particular middle space with me, where she wanted to be kind but had never quite figured out how to do it without it costing her something with Diane. I did not blame her for it, I understood it. It did not make it less lonely. "She's just curious," Leela said finally. "She's always been curious," I agreed and went to find my husband. On the drive home, Tamaz asked me what Leela had wanted. "Nothing," I said. "Your mother's been asking about my work." "I'll talk to her." "You don't need to," he glanced at me. This was a conversation we had in various forms about twice a year, and we had gotten very efficient with it. We could now convey the entire disagreement in about 4 exchanges. He believed that direct conversation with his mother would produce change. I believed the evidence did not support this. Neither of us was wrong exactly. We were just looking at different things. "The dinner's in 2 weeks," he said. "I know. Are you going to be okay?" I looked out the window at the street lights going past. "I'm always okay." That was not entirely true, and he knew it, but we both understood what I meant, which is that I was not going to fall apart. I was not going to give Diane the satisfaction. And more than that, I had something in my desk drawer now, and I had a folder in Gloria Huang's office, and I had been paying attention for 3 years to the specific vocabulary Diane used when she talked about my daughter. I was more than okay. I was ready. I just did not know yet how ready I would need to be. The week before the dinner, I went back to Gloria's office on a Wednesday at 4:30 in the afternoon and signed the trust documents. Renata met me there. She had driven down from Marietta and signed the trustee paperwork. We stood in Gloria's conference room afterward, and Renata hugged me and held on for slightly longer than usual. "She's going to be fine, Nor," Renata said. I was not going to cry. I was absolutely not going to cry in Gloria Huang's conference room over paperwork that I had initiated and completed exactly according to my own plan. "I know she is," I said. "That's why I did this." Gloria walked us out and handed me a sealed copy of the documents in a manila envelope. I put it in my bag. On the drive home, I stopped at a pharmacy to pick up a prescription for Cleo. She had been seeing a pediatric specialist, Dr. Yolanda Mbeki, for recurring ear infections, and there was a course of antibiotics that needed to be started before the weekend. I picked up the prescription, sat in the parking lot for a moment, and thought about what the next Saturday was going to look like. Then I started the car and drove home to my daughter. The night before the dinner, after Cleo was in bed, I sat at my desk and went through a folder I had been keeping for the better part of a year. Not obsessively, not dramatically, the way you might organize receipts, systematic, useful, without a great deal of emotion. The folder contained a printed record of Cleo's assessments. Her academic reports from Ashwood, each one with Principal Ake's signature at the bottom. The letter about the Founder's Excellence Award, which I had kept sealed in the envelope. And a small printed card from Dr. Mbicky's office with Cleo's most recent check-in notes, which I had requested as part of her ongoing file: healthy, thriving, no developmental concerns, excellent verbal and conceptual skills noted by the clinical team. I put the award letter on top. I put the folder in my bag next to the sealed trust copy. I am telling you all of this now because what happened the next evening looked, from the outside, like a moment of impulse. Like I just happened to have the right thing at the right time, and I want you to understand that it was not impulse. It was 3 years of the clock running down. The morning of the dinner, Cleo came downstairs in her school sweatshirt and asked me if she had to wear nice clothes. I told her she could wear whatever felt comfortable. She thought about it and chose dark blue corduroy pants and a cream-colored sweater that her Aunt Renata had given her. She stood in front of the mirror for a minute, very serious, the way she did most things. "Is Grandma Diane going to be there?" she asked. "It's her house," I said. Cleo nodded slowly. "Okay." That was it. 2 words, but I heard everything in them: the small adjustment, the readying, the decision to be fine. She was 8 years old and she was already doing the thing I had spent years learning to do, which is make peace with the room before you walk into it. I crouched down in front of her. "You know you don't have to talk if you don't want to, right? You can just be there." She looked at me very directly, the way she does when she is deciding whether a statement requires correction. "I know, Mom. And you know that being quiet doesn't mean anything is wrong with you." A pause, then, "I know." I believed she knew it in the abstract. I was less certain she knew it in her body, in the particular way you can know something but still feel the weight of someone else's opinion pressing on it. I wanted to say more. I did not, because Cleo does not like to be prepared for situations as though they are obstacles. She finds it condescending, and she is right to. She was 8, not 4. She could handle a dinner. I was the one who needed to be prepared. Tamaz drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my bag between my feet and watched the neighborhoods go past, and I thought about nothing in particular, the way you sometimes do before something that you have already decided everything about. Everything I'd built was about to be tested in front of 14 people, at a table that had never once had a seat for me at the end where decisions were made. I was not nervous. I was something else entirely, the particular stillness that comes when the clock finally reaches 0. Diane's house was what real estate listings call a traditional colonial, which in her neighborhood meant 4 bedrooms, a formal dining room she used 6 times a year, and a kitchen that had been renovated twice in 10 years, despite the fact that Diane did not cook so much as she directed cooking. She had a woman named Vera who came on event days, and Vera moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible around difficult employers. We arrived at 6:45. Tamaz carried the wine, 2 bottles he had selected carefully because his mother tracked these things. I carried my bag. The driveway already held 4 cars. Ronaldo's Cadillac was there, and Leela's white SUV, and 2 others I recognized as belonging to Diane's sister Ophelia and Ophelia's husband Clement. There were also Tamaz's cousin Berto and his wife Priscilla, who had driven up from Savannah and who I genuinely liked. Priscilla was a high school vice principal, quietly funny, and she had the specific quality of being kind without needing anything in return for it. Bernadette Lau was there, seated in the living room with a glass of something already in her hand when we arrived. That made 14 people total, including Cleo, including me. Cleo walked in ahead of me, her dark blue cords making a soft sound with each step. Diane was at the base of the stairs and she opened her arms in the automatic way she had with Tamaz, then bent down toward Cleo. "There she is," Diane said. Her voice was warm the way a hotel lobby is warm, managed, impersonal, designed to give a specific impression. Quiet as a mouse, as always. Cleo said, "Hi, Grandma Diane," and accepted the hug with the still patience of a child who has already decided she is fine. I watched Tamaz's face do the small thing it did when his mother landed a comment sideways, a brief tightening around the eyes that he had never fully learned to hide. He kissed his mother's cheek and said something about the wine, and the moment dissolved into the logistics of coats and greetings, and I followed everyone into the house. The dining room table was set with Diane's good china, the cream and gold set she brought out to mark the hierarchy of occasions, and the fact that she was using it tonight told me she had decided this dinner mattered. 14 places, the seating already arranged by the small cards in their silver holders. I found mine on the far end, beside Berto and across from Priscilla, which was genuinely the best seat assignment I'd gotten in 8 years of attending this dinner. Cleo was seated between me and Priscilla, which I noted with something close to gratitude. Priscilla would talk to her like a person. Diane was at the head. Ronaldo at the other end, with Leela on his right and Bernadette on his left, and Ophelia and Clement arranged in the middle, and the geography of the table told the same story it always told, which is that there was a center, and there was a perimeter, and everyone knew which was which. Vera brought out the soup course. The conversation moved through the usual territory: Berto's renovation project in Savannah, Ophelia's younger daughter's college applications, Ronaldo's opinion about a city council decision that nobody else had particularly strong feelings about. Cleo ate her soup carefully, listening more than talking, answering when Priscilla asked her direct questions about school. "What's your favorite subject?" Priscilla asked her. Cleo considered this with the seriousness she brought to most questions. "Math," she said. "And also reading." "But they're different kinds of favorite." "How do you mean?" "Math is like a puzzle where you know there's an answer. Reading is like," she paused, searching, "you find something different every time." Priscilla nodded like she found this genuinely interesting, which she did, because Priscilla was that kind of person. I noticed Bernadette glance down the table at this exchange and then look at Diane, a small telegraphed look I had seen before that meant she was waiting for Diane to establish how to feel about something. Diane had been watching. She was always watching. She lifted her wine glass and looked at me with that pleasant steadiness that was never entirely pleasant. "She's opened up a little," Diane said, addressing me as though Cleo were not 2 feet away and perfectly capable of hearing. I remember when we couldn't get 2 words out of her at the table. Priscilla's fork paused above her bowl, just for a second. "She talks plenty," I said, keeping my voice even. "She just chooses when," Diane smiled. "Of course." There it was again, the "of course." I looked down at my soup. The second course came out. The conversation shifted and moved, and Cleo finished her dinner quietly and asked me in a low voice if she could go look at the books in Ronaldo's study, which he had always told her she was welcome to do. I told her to go ahead, and she slipped out of her chair and disappeared down the hall. Which is the precise moment everything shifted. Diane watched Cleo leave. Then she picked up her fork and, without changing her expression, addressed the table at large with the comfort of someone who believed herself to be in a room full of people who agreed with her. "I do worry," she said, "about how she's developing socially. Children need to learn to engage, to speak up. Some children," she set her fork down on the edge of her plate with a soft click, "some children just aren't built for that. And I think it's kinder to be honest about it." Ophelia made a soft sound of agreement. Bernadette nodded. Clement looked at his plate. Leela looked at her wine glass in that way she had of studying objects when she was trying not to be somewhere. Berto cleared his throat but didn't say anything. He glanced at me. Tamaz was very still on my right. "She just isn't smart enough," Diane continued, her tone still warm, still reasonable, the tone of someone delivering a difficult but necessary truth, "to really thrive in those kinds of social environments. It's not a criticism, it's just reality." The words landed in the specific way that certain words do when they are about your child, not like a shout, but like a slow-moving thing you can't get out in front of. I felt Tamaz's hand move under the table and find my knee. Not restraining. Just present, I did not look at him. I looked at Diane. There was a moment, and I want to be exact about this moment because I have thought about it many times since, where I made a decision that was not about strategy anymore. It was not about the folder in my bag or the timing I had planned or the specific advantage of waiting. Something underneath all of that shifted, and what replaced it was very quiet and very certain, the way a door sounds when it closes completely. My daughter was in the next room. She could come back at any moment. And Diane had just called her not smart enough at a dinner table with 12 adults, and no one had said a word. I looked at Tamaz. He was looking at me, and whatever he saw in my face made him take his hand off my knee. I reached down and picked up my bag from the floor beside my chair. I had not planned to do it this way. I had thought, in the abstract planning I had done in the days before, that there would be some other catalyst, something directed at me rather than Cleo, something I could respond to with the calm deliberateness I had been building toward. I had not planned for this exact moment. But the folder was in my bag and Cleo was 20 feet away, and Diane had just said those words in front of 12 people, and everything I had built over 3 years had been built for exactly this. I excused myself from the table, walked down the hall to Ronaldo's study, knocked once on the open door, and looked in at my daughter, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book about the solar system open across her lap. She looked up at me. "Hey, Bug, would you be okay watching something on my phone in here for a little while? I need to talk to the adults." She looked at me for a moment with those serious eyes. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need to talk." She took my phone without further question, settled back against the bookcase, and was already looking at the screen before I pulled the door mostly closed behind me. I walked back to the dining room. I did not sit down. I unzipped my bag and went through it for 2 seconds, and then I put the sealed envelope from Principal Ake's office on the table beside my plate. I put the assessment folder next to it, and I stood there and looked at Diane. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to finish that. If you're still with me, stay, because what I did next is the reason I am telling this story." Diane looked at the envelope on the table the way people look at something they do not yet have context for, a slight narrowing, a brief recalibration. "I'm sorry?" Her voice was entirely composed. "You were talking about Cleo." I kept my voice at the same temperature as hers. "I'd like to talk about Cleo, too." Tamaz sat very still. Leela had stopped moving. Priscilla, across the table, leaned back an inch, not away, just positioning herself to watch. "Nora." Tamaz said my name quietly, not as a warning, more like a check-in. I looked at him. "It's fine." Diane's chin lifted a fraction. "I wasn't saying anything unkind, I was being practical. You said she wasn't smart enough." I let the words sit there without decoration. "At a dinner table, with your family, while she was 20 feet away. I said she might find certain environments challenging." "That is not the same. You said some children just aren't smart enough." I picked up the envelope. "This is a letter from Principal Damon Ake at Ashwood Academy. He called, by the way. That's what your book club friends heard. He called to tell me that Cleo had been selected for the Founders Excellence Award. 1 student per grade level, for exceptional academic achievement and intellectual leadership." I set the envelope back down. "She received the highest assessment score in her cohort in verbal reasoning, 99th percentile." The room was very quiet. Diane's expression did not break. It held for 4 full seconds with the rigidity of something under pressure. Her hand went to the base of her wine glass. She did not pick it up. She just touched the stem. Bernadette looked at Diane. Diane did not look back at her. "Well." Diane's voice had changed register, not dramatically, but I caught it. Slightly higher. "Clipped at the edges." "An award from a school doesn't?" "The assessment wasn't from the school." I opened the folder and slid the top page across the table toward the center, facing out. "It was conducted by Dr. Sasha Obi at the university's Gifted Learning Program 3 years ago. I had it done because I was watching my daughter process information at a level I wanted to understand, and I wanted documentation." Ophelia leaned forward slightly, involuntarily, and then caught herself and sat back. Ronaldo, at the far end of the table, lowered his fork very slowly. He looked at Diane. She was not looking at him. 3 years, my voice stayed level. "I have known this about my daughter for 3 years. Every dinner, every comment about how quiet she is, how she doesn't speak up, how some children just aren't built for it. I sat here and I listened, and I didn't correct you. Not because I didn't have the information, because I was waiting to see if it would stop on its own." "Nora." Leela's voice from the other side of the table. Not sharp, careful. She was looking at me with something that was not opposition. It was closer to recognition. Diane's hand left the wine glass. She folded both hands in her lap, which I had never seen her do at a dinner table. It made her look smaller, and I do not think she realized it. "I was making a general observation," she said. "About children who are introverted. I wasn't. You said she isn't smart enough." Berto's voice, quiet, from the end of the table. He had not been looking at anyone in particular, but now he was looking at Diane. Those were the exact words. Diane turned toward him with the controlled displeasure of a woman unaccustomed to being corrected by family members she had assigned to the perimeter. "I don't think you need to. I was sitting right here." Berto's voice stayed quiet. He had the specific quality of stillness of someone who has thought carefully before speaking. "Cleo is 8 years old. I don't think I misheard." The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before. Clement had put his fork down. Priscilla had her hands folded on the table in front of her, watching Diane with the particular attention of a school administrator who has witnessed this specific behavior pattern before and is categorizing it in real time. Diane looked at Tamaz. Something in her expression shifted, an appeal, the instinct of a woman who had always been able to look at her son and find a route back to solid ground. Tamaz looked at his hands. That was the moment I saw Diane understand that something was different, not just tonight, fundamentally. The look she gave Tamaz's bowed head was brief and startled, like a woman who reaches for a light switch she has used for 30 years and finds the wall smooth. "Tamaz," she said. "Mom," his voice was quiet. "Let her finish." Ophelia made a small sound, not quite a protest, more the sound of someone recalibrating their surroundings. She looked at Clement. He looked back at her without expression. I let a moment pass. Then I said, "There's something else." Diane's attention came back to me. Her composure was still there, but it was the composure of effort now rather than habit. I reached into the folder. I did not pull out the trust documents, those were not for this table, and Gloria had been clear that they were for my protection, not my performance. What I pulled out was Cleo's most recent academic report from Ashwood, the one from the semester just ended. I set it in front of me and spoke from it without handing it across. Her teacher's note this semester says that Cleo consistently demonstrates exceptional depth of analysis for her age, leads discussion groups by asking questions rather than dominating them, and has twice this semester caught errors in exercises that the teacher subsequently corrected. Her reading level is currently assessed at a 7th grade equivalent. I closed the report. She is quiet because she is listening. She has always been listening, every word. The last 2 words sat in the air. I intended them to. I watched Diane absorb this. I watched it move through her, a micro-expression first, just around the eyes, a brief involuntary contraction. Then her shoulders, which had been set very straight all evening, shifted forward by perhaps a centimeter. Then the color in her face changed, not dramatically, not in the way of a flush, but more like something was being quietly withdrawn from underneath. She looked, for the first time since I had known her actual age. Bernadette reached over and touched Diane's arm. It was meant to be supportive, I think, but it had the effect of making Diane look isolated rather than accompanied, the way a hand on the shoulder can sometimes mark a person as the one who needs tending. "You must be very proud," Diane said finally. Her voice had gone flat in a way I had never heard from her. The warmth she managed so carefully had simply departed. "I am. No more, no less." Tamaz looked up. He was looking at me with an expression I did not entirely know how to name, not surprise, because he had known the shape of this, but something more like witnessing. The way you look at someone you love doing something you understood they could do, but had not yet seen them do. "I don't think you intended to harm her," I said to Diane. "I meant it. I think you have very fixed ideas about what intelligence looks like, and Cleo doesn't fit them. But intention doesn't change what she has heard at this table. It doesn't change what she is old enough to remember." Diane's mouth opened, closed. Leela spoke, and her voice was quiet but completely steady. "She's right, Mom." Diane turned to look at her daughter. Something crossed Leela's face. It cost her something to say it, I could see that, but she held the eye contact. "She's right," Leela said again. "We've all heard it, we just didn't say anything." Ophelia looked at the table. Clement looked at Ophelia. Bernadette removed her hand from Diane's arm. Ronaldo, at the far end of the table, looked at his wife for a long moment. He did not speak. But he did not look away either, and I understood that this was its own form of statement from a man who had spent 37 years of marriage perfecting the diplomatic non-intervention, and that refusing to look away tonight was the closest he was going to come to choosing a side. Diane's hands, still folded in her lap, tightened. I could see it from where I stood. She pressed her lips together once and then released them. "I would like," she said with enormous control, "to have a private conversation with my son." Tamaz looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at me. I gave him nothing in either direction, this was his choice to make. "We can do that," he said. "Later, tonight is not the time." Diane stood up from the table. It was not a dramatic gesture, she did not slam anything or raise her voice. She stood up with the careful dignity of a woman who has realized she has lost the room and has decided that departure is preferable to remaining in it. She said she needed a moment, and she walked toward the kitchen, and Vera, who had appeared in the doorway at some point in the last few minutes, stepped aside to let her pass. Bernadette started to stand. Leela looked at her and shook her head very slightly. Bernadette sat back down. Nobody spoke for a full 7 seconds. I counted. Then Priscilla reached across the table and picked up the assessment report I had set down. She looked at it quietly, her expression the composed professional attention of someone who had spent years looking at exactly this kind of documentation, and then she set it back down and looked at me. 99th percentile in verbal reasoning at 5 years old. Her voice was even, but there was something warm underneath it. That child is extraordinary. I know, I said. I put the folder back in my bag. I picked up my wine glass and sat back down. The dinner table reorganized itself around the new reality of the room. Berto began talking to Ronaldo about something unrelated, the quiet conversational triage of men who have decided that normality is the best available response to extraordinary tension. Ophelia and Clement spoke to each other in low voices. Leela was looking at her hands, but there was something in her face that had settled, not happiness, but resolution, the look of someone who has finally said the thing they had been carrying for a long time. Tamaz put his hand over mine on the table. I turned my hand over and held his. 20 minutes later, Cleo came back from the study and slid into her chair and asked if there was dessert. Priscilla told her there was a chocolate cake, and Cleo said good with the simple satisfaction of someone whose priorities are entirely in order. Diane did not come back to the table. Vera served the cake. The dinner ended the way dinners end, coats, goodbyes, people finding their cars in the dark. Leela caught me at the door. I should have said something a long time ago. Her voice was low, and there was no performance in it, just the plainness of something that had been true for a while. I'm sorry I didn't. I looked at her. I know you know that. She nodded once, and that was the end of it. We drove home with Cleo asleep in the back seat 20 minutes into the drive. Tamaz had both hands on the wheel and was quiet for a long stretch, the particular quiet of someone processing rather than withdrawing. The award ceremony is November 2nd, I said. He glanced at me in the dark. I'll be there. I know you will. Another quiet stretch, the highway lights going past. My mother's going to want to talk. I know, you can decide what you want to say to her. He was silent for a moment. What would you want me to say to her? I looked out at the dark road ahead. That what she says about Cleo has consequences, that I've been patient about it for 3 years and that patience is over. He nodded slowly. And that she is welcome to be in Cleo's life, I said, if she can be in it without deciding in advance who Cleo is. Tamaz did not respond right away, but his hands loosened on the wheel, and something in the set of his shoulders changed, and I understood that he had made a decision that had been a long time coming, and that tonight had simply been the moment it became impossible to defer. In the weeks after the dinner, several things happened in sequence. Tamaz had the conversation with his mother. I was not present for it, and I did not ask for a detailed report, but I know it lasted 2.5 hours at his parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, and I know that Tamaz came home afterward quieter than usual in the way he is when he has said something difficult and believes it needed to be said. He told me his mother had cried, and that she had tried several times to reframe what had happened as a misunderstanding, and that he had not let her. He told me that his father had sat in the room for the whole conversation and had, at one point, told Diane that she owed Nora and Cleo an apology. I did not expect that from Ronaldo. It mattered. Diane called me 4 days later. The call lasted 11 minutes. She said she had not meant to imply that Cleo was limited, that she had been speaking generally, that she had always loved Cleo and only wanted the best for her. She did not say the words "I'm sorry" until I waited through a long pause, and she understood I was waiting. Then she said them, in the clipped, effortful way of someone who finds the words genuinely difficult, and I said thank you, and we agreed that November 2nd's ceremony was something we all wanted to attend. She came to the Ashwood ceremony. She sat beside Ronaldo in the second row. When Principal Ape called Cleo's name and my daughter walked across that stage in her dark blue cords and her cream sweater and shook his hand and accepted the framed certificate with both hands, and then turned to face the audience with that particular expression of hers, not beaming, just quietly, completely present, I heard Ronaldo make a sound beside me that was unmistakably pride. I did not look at Diane. I looked at my daughter. But I was aware, peripherally, of Diane's hands in her lap pressing together in that way I had seen at the dinner table, and I was aware that she was watching Cleo on that stage with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not warmth exactly. Something more complicated. The expression of a person encountering a version of reality that requires them to revise something they had been certain about for a long time. Whether that revision took hold, I cannot tell you with certainty. What I can tell you is that in the months following the dinner, the comments at family gatherings stopped. Not gradually, they stopped. Diane did not again, in my presence or in Cleo's, characterize my daughter's quietness as a deficiency or suggest that her development was a concern. Whether this was genuine understanding or simple recalculation, the effect was the same, and I had decided long ago that I did not require Diane to feel differently about Cleo, only to behave differently. Leela and I have had more conversations in the 8 months since the dinner than we had in the previous 8 years combined. She came to Cleo's birthday in March, a small gathering at our house with Cleo's school friends, and she brought a book she had found at a used bookstore, an old illustrated atlas of ocean exploration, and Cleo carried it around for the rest of the day like it was a found object. Leela and I stood in the kitchen that afternoon and talked for 40 minutes about nothing dramatic, just the ordinary texture of family and work and what we want for the people we love. And I thought about all the years that conversation had been available if the circumstances had been slightly different. Priscilla texted me 2 weeks after the dinner to say that Berto had told her the full version of the evening, and she just wanted to say what she had not had the chance to say properly at the table, which was that watching me stand up for Cleo that night had been one of the most quietly gutting things she had ever seen at a dinner party. I called her back and we talked for an hour, and she is coming to Cleo's school science fair in May. The educational trust, which Gloria Huang and I completed and signed the week before the dinner, continues to grow. By the time Cleo is ready for college, it will be more than sufficient. Cleo does not know about it in detail, she is 8, and these are adult arrangements, but she knows, in the way children know things, that she is taken care of, that her mother has been paying attention, that the adults in her world are building something solid underneath her. My consulting practice now contracts with 6 school districts across 3 states. Tamaz knows the full scope of it. It does not feel like a secret anymore, and the relief of that is something I did not fully anticipate. Cleo is doing well. She is reading at a 9th grade level now. She has a best friend at Ashwood named Wren, who is equally serious and equally quiet, and the two of them spend hours working on a hand-drawn book about a girl who discovers that different animals can talk, but only in different languages. And each chapter is in a new language, and Cleo has been teaching herself basic phrases in Portuguese and Japanese, so the dialogue is accurate. She told me about the project at dinner last week in about 12 sentences, completely unprompted, with the focused precision she brings to everything that matters to her. She is not a child who doesn't speak up. She is a child who speaks when she has something to say. I think about Diane's words at that table, some children just aren't smart enough, and I think about what it would have cost Cleo to hear them and have no one respond. To grow up in a family where that statement was made at a dinner table and absorbed and moved past. Children are listening even when adults decide they are not. Especially then, I do not carry anger about it. I have set it down, not because it was small, but because I did what needed to be done with it, and there is nothing more useful I can do with it now. What I carry instead is the memory of Cleo walking across that stage in November, and the sound of her principal saying her full name into a microphone, and the particular quality of that moment when the room understood who she was. I also carry the knowledge that I did not wait for someone else to tell that room. I built the documentation. I kept the records. I showed up with the evidence and I stood at that table and I said it myself. So, did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.